In the late 12th century, the thrones of Europe were filled by powerful, ambitious monarchs, but few rivalries shaped the medieval world more than the one between England and France. Though separated by the English Channel, these two kingdoms were bound together by history, marriage, and war. The kings of England were not only rulers of their island realm, they also controlled vast swathes of French territory, stretching from Normandy in the north to Aquitaine in the south. By the late 12th century, the King of England was Richard I, known to history as Richard the Lionheart. A man of immense personal courage and military skill, Richard became a legend in his own time. His exploits during the Third Crusade against Saladin captured the imagination of both his allies and his enemies. But while Richard was waging war in the Holy Land and later imprisoned on his way home, another king, quieter but far more enduring, was making his moves back in Europe. This was Philip II of France, later known as Philip Augustus. Compared to Richard, Philip was less flamboyant, less romantic, and far less celebrated in song or tale. It is often in contrast to Richard the Lionheart that Philip Augustus is remembered. Both men took up the cross and marched for the Third Crusade. Both returned to Europe to find their kingdoms under threat, and both, at times allies and at times enemies. But while Richard died young and left behind a troubled legacy, Philip lived long, and by the time of his death, he had laid the foundations of a powerful, centralized French monarchy. Philip was born on August 21st, 1165, in the town of Gonesse, just outside Paris. His birth was regarded as nothing short of miraculous. His father, Louis VII of France, had been king for over 3 decades, but had no surviving sons despite 2 previous marriages. His first wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, had borne him 2 daughters before their marriage was annulled. She later married Henry II of England, and their union produced Richard the Lionheart and John, 2 future kings of England. This meant that from the moment of his birth, Philip was already entangled in the dynastic web that bound the Plantagenets and the Capetians in a long, bitter struggle over territory and authority. Philip's mother, Adela of Champagne, was Louis VII's 3rd wife. She came from a powerful noble family, and her influence, along with that of her relatives, would shape much of Philip's early court politics. Because of his father's age and declining health, Philip was known during his youth as Dieudonné, meaning God-given. France at the time was a kingdom in name, but in reality the king held direct authority over only a small portion of the land, primarily the Île-de-France region around Paris. The great lords of France, such as the Dukes of Normandy, Counts of Anjou, and Dukes of Aquitaine, controlled far more territory than the king himself. By the time Philip reached his teens, Louis VII's health was failing rapidly. Blind and unable to govern, Louis arranged for his son to be crowned during his lifetime, a rare but not unprecedented act meant to ensure an undisputed succession. So in November 1179, at the age of 14, Philip was crowned King of the Franks at the Cathedral of Reims. The following year, in September 1180, Louis VII died, and Philip became the sole ruler of France. Philip was only 15, but he was already showing signs of the qualities that would define his reign: caution, intelligence, and political focus. One of his first challenges came from within his own relatives, particularly from the Champagne and Flanders branches of the nobility, sought to dominate the young king's court. But Philip was not content to be a figurehead. With quiet determination, he began to push back against their influence and assert his independence. From the start, Philip showed an instinct for practical rule. He negotiated peace with the Count of Flanders, who had been an adversary of his father, and forged a temporary alliance with Henry II of England, biding his time and observing his rivals. As Philip entered adulthood, his reign took on a new intensity. France remained a kingdom in name, but in practice, the crown's authority was limited. The French king held direct control only over the small Île-de-France region, while vast stretches of French territory were ruled by the English king, Henry II, as part of his so-called Angevin Empire. Though technically Henry was a vassal to the French crown, his real power far exceeded that of the young Capetian king. It was clear that if Philip wanted to strengthen the French monarchy, he would first have to confront the overwhelming dominance of the Plantagenets. The dynastic links between the two royal houses were already deep and tangled. Philip's own sister, Margaret of France, had been married to Henry the young king, the eldest surviving son of Henry II of England. The marriage was arranged while both kings, Louis VII and Henry II, were still alive, and it was intended to cement peace between the two realms. Margaret was promised a large dowry, including the strategically significant county of Vexin, a contested border territory between Normandy and the royal French domain. However, the arrangement soon led to conflict. Henry the young king died suddenly in 1883, only a few years after the marriage, and without producing any children. With his death, Margaret became a widow, and the English crown refused to return her dowry, particularly the Vexin, to the French. The Vexin was a critical buffer zone between the power bases of the two monarchs. Philip, still in his teens, saw the English refusal as both an insult and a threat. Early in his reign, Philip used diplomacy to navigate the powerful interests around him. He understood that an open conflict with the English king would be unwise, while his position at home was still uncertain. But behind the scenes, he was laying the groundwork for a future confrontation. Philip encouraged dissent within the Plantagenet family, which was already divided by internal rivalry. Henry's sons, Richard, Geoffrey, and John, were often in rebellion against their father, and Philip made himself useful as an ally to whichever son was at odds with Henry at the time. Philip's first significant opportunity came with the death of Geoffrey, Duke of Brittany, in 1186, who had left behind a posthumous son, Arthur of Brittany. Philip skillfully used Arthur's claim to press against English interests in France, while continuing to maneuver between Richard and John as they vied for power. But the young king remained cautious. He negotiated a peace with Henry II and even traveled to Normandy in 1188 to meet with him face to face, hoping to resolve the dispute over the Vexin and Margaret's dowry. Nothing came of it. The conflict over these lands remained unresolved, and Philip knew that diplomacy alone would not restore France's authority. He needed to bide his time and wait for the right moment to strike. That moment came in 1189 when Henry II died, exhausted by years of warfare and betrayal from his own sons. His heir, Richard the Lionheart, ascended the throne of England. Though the two kings had previously been allies, fighting together against Henry II, their relationship quickly turned into a cautious rivalry. In 1190, Philip and Richard set out together on the Third Crusade, responding to the call to reclaim Jerusalem after its fall to Saladin. The crusade offered a chance for both kings to project power beyond Europe, but it also revealed the sharp differences in their personalities. Richard was bold, daring, and often impulsive. Philip, on the other hand, was methodical, calculating and focused on long-term objectives. Tensions between them grew as the campaign progressed. Philip left the crusade early, returning to France in 1191, long before the mission was complete. Officially, his departure was due to illness. But his real motivation was clear. Richard was far more interested in glory abroad than in defending his holdings at home. And with Richard still fighting in the Holy Land, Philip acted. While Richard fought in the east, Philip moved quickly in the west. He attacked English holdings in Normandy, supported local rebellions, and attempted to use legal claims to seize Plantagenet lands. When Richard was captured on his return journey by the Duke of Austria and held for ransom, Philip tried to extend his captivity, even offering the Holy Roman Emperor money to keep Richard imprisoned longer. But Richard was eventually released in 1194, and the war resumed. For the next 5 years, Philip and Richard fought a cold, grinding campaign across the fields of Normandy and Anjou. Then, in 1199, fate once again intervened. Richard the Lionheart was struck by a crossbow bolt during a siege in central France. He died from the wound. With his death, Philip saw his greatest opportunity yet. The new King of England was John, Richard's younger brother. A man widely distrusted by his own barons and widely underestimated by his enemies. Philip recognized John's weaknesses immediately. Richard the Lionheart was gone, and the English crown now rested on the head of his brother, King John, a man with neither his brother's skill nor his popularity. Philip Augustus, who had spent years matching wits with the greatest warrior king of his age, now faced a far weaker opponent. The long rivalry between France and the Angevin Empire was about to enter its most decisive chapter, one that would see kingdoms reshaped and the map of France redrawn forever.